Hi and welcome back, Lady Joyful here, and I'm so glad you could join me today for this video featuring the Happy Mouse digi stamp from Sasayaki Glitter. I'm going to be colouring in the image, and I'm also going to be making a textured sponged ink background for this card. So I will start with the colouring, and I'm using Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers for my colouring, which are alcohol-based markers, and I'm going to be colouring in the mouse brown with these markers. My go-to for mice is actually grey, but I do not have grey Spectrum Noir markers. Normally I use Yuzu alcohol markers for my greys. Yuzu alcohol markers are just a cheap brand of markers that were the very first alcohol markers I got when I was trying out alcohol markers. I'm trying to avoid using those now, mostly because my colours are drying up. I've had them for almost a year now, and as I said, they were very cheap. I'm waiting for my grey Spectrum Noirs to arrive. I have ordered some, but in the meantime I'm just trying to avoid needing grey as much as possible, which is why I decided on the brown mouse. So as you can see, the caps for all the markers are being shown on the screen, so you know what colours I'm using if you want to use the same colours. I started by adding my darkest shade and then my mid-tone, and I will then move on to my lightest tone. That's how I normally do my colouring. I also tend to put my shadows on the left hand side as if my light source is on the right or the top right. The exception to that rule is if there is a specific light source drawn into the image, then of course I will use that to guide where my shadows should be. So I'm just blending out now with my lightest colour, and I had used two earth browns. My lightest and darkest were earth browns, and a red brown for my colouring for the mouse. I coloured the body off screen, but it was done just exactly the same way as the head and the ears. Now I'm going to move on to the inner ears, and I want these to still be brown but be kind of pinker brown. So I started by laying down a layer of pink, and then I'm adding in my shadow with the brown, with my mid-tone brown, not the darkest one, because I wanted the inner ears to be lighter than the rest of the mouse. I will then go over the whole of the inner ear with my lightest brown. I decided that knocked the shadows back a bit too much, so I am going back in with the mid-tone to darken them up a bit. And the shadows are coming under that top part of the ears as if the ears are kind of cup-shaped, so they would be casting shadows across the top portion there. And then I will go back in again with my pink just to pinken them up even more, and I will also use that pink to add some colour to the cheeks. The cheeks are drawn in on this image, but where I've already coloured over them it's a little bit difficult to see, especially on that left hand side, so I just had to lift it up into the light to try and see where that line was. Having finished colouring my mouse, I'm going to move on to the background, and I decided to do some ink blending. You could always do this before you do the mouse colouring. It probably would have been easier than trying to avoid, because the brown would colour right over this anyway if you did get some in the mouse area. So I'm just using some scraps of paper to try and mask off, and initially I was trying to go for a smooth look with my ink blending. I'm using a Ranger ink blending tool and Altenew Forest Glades ink. And as I said, I was trying to go for a smooth ink blended look, but this paper is not the best for ink blending on, and it was also quite fiddly trying to blend around all these little areas, all the flowers for example, and around the mouse leg. So in the end I just decided not even to try. I decided just to let it have the texture from the kind of less smooth ink blending, I guess. I just went with the look, and in fact I later will come back in and try and add even more texture. So rather than trying to blend the colour out, I'm just kind of letting it do what it will do and stippling it and letting it happen. I do dab off the ink to the side on some scratch paper before I bring the blending tool onto my paper. This is just because that way I can control how much ink there is and not put down too thick a layer to start with. So after I completed the grass, I'm going to move on to doing the sky. I have another Altenew ink here, and this is Ocean Waves, and this time I'm using a makeup sponge to do the colouring. I like the control you have with the makeup blending sponge because you can fold it differently to get a different size of surface area for the sponging, and I'm just kind of dabbing and blending and rolling the sponge to get the colour on, and I felt like the texture kind of gives the impression of clouds. I'd considered making clouds by using a cloud mask, but then I decided I liked the storybook feel that the textured grass had, and I wanted to continue with that in the clouds. So then I will continue adding some blue, make sure I've got it in all the gaps between the mouse and around the flowers and the butterfly, and I'm going to use just the tip of the sponge, the narrow tip, and sponge blue on with that, which adds even more texture and interest. The narrow tip is also good for getting in small areas, of course. And then I decided to go back to the grass and use another makeup sponge, and again I'm using the edge of the sponge just to add some texture into the grass. There were some places that already had texture, but given how the sky had turned out, I decided I wanted to add in even more and really play up the textured look. So I just keep working my way across, and I did vaguely try to put it heavier behind the mouse where the cast shadow would be, but I wasn't that fussed about getting that shadow in. Having finished all the ink blending, I'm going back to my alcohol markers and I'm going to add in the details. I compared the ink blended colour to my hex chart for my Spectrum Noir markers to see which colour would be a close match to use for colouring the grass, and I settled on this dark green, which is called Bamboo, and I'm using that to colour in the blades of grass and the flower stems. I then decided to use yellow for the flowers, and I'm just kind of stippling that in and not being too fussed about staying within the lines because I thought it added to the loose feel. So I just stipple all those in, and then I will also use the yellow to colour the inner portions or the decorative portions of the left butterfly's wings. And then again I'm going to use it on these other flowers just to colour the centres of these flowers. For the butterfly's wings I decided to use purple, and I'm using that purple for the portion nearer the body, and then I'm blending it out to pink further away from the body. I'm not fussing too much about shading on the butterflies, just laying the colour down. So doing the same on the second wing, the purple, and blending out to the pink. Then I decided to use that same pink to colour the second butterfly. So I'm filling in the whole wing area pink, adding a darker pink to the centre, and then blending it back out with the light pink. Normally I work from darkest to light, but sometimes I do go the other way. And for this butterfly I'm using the lilac for the decorative portion of the wings. It took me a while to decide on the colour for the little flowers at the front. I eventually decided to go for a dark orangey yellow, and I'm keeping these very simple. I'm not bothering with any shading, just laying the colour in. I decided that I wanted the focus to be really on the mouse, which is why the mouse has that very detailed shading, and the rest of the image is kind of almost flatter, the colouring of the flowers, for example, so that they don't detract from the mouse, so that the focus really stays on the mouse. Having finished all my colouring, I'm going on to stamp my sentiment, and this is a sentiment from a Simon Says stamp set which came in their recent card kit. I do not remember the name of the stamp set, but it will be linked down below, as will all the other products I have used. I'm using Altenew Dusk ink for stamping the sentiment. The Dusk is just slightly darker than the ocean waves, which is the colour I used for the sky, and I thought it worked nicely with my image rather than using black. I could have used black, but I liked the softness of the blue. We'll then adhere the panel with double-sided tape to my card base, and I used my MISTI just to make sure I got that correctly positioned on the card base. And that completes my card. If you liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up, and you can click on the buttons on screen to subscribe both to my channel and the Sasayaki Glitter YouTube channel. There are more videos here that you may be interested in. If you have any comments, do leave them down below, or you can also contact me on social media or on my blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.